reality would act differently in different kinds of states of consciousness, if you will?
Well, I think what is happening here is that the brain functions on vibrational levels. And the brain, the thing that people talk about, brain waves. Now, effectively, when we are wide awake, there are different kind of brain states. But then as we go into meditation, we go into what's called alpha state. Then when we're anxious and everything, we go into beta. But there are also something called theta waves when the brain vibrates at certain levels, or the electrical field around the brain is resonating at a certain level. And I think when we resonate at this particular level, we seem to attune into something else. And I think what is happening here, and this brings it beautifully in to my overall model, because what I think is happening here is that consciousness is, when they're in these states, we draw information up from the 0 point field. Now, how this occurs is quite a complex model, because I think what is happening is that there are very, very small structures in the brain called microtubules. And these are very, very small structures of protein that are found inside the neurons of the brain. There are literally trillions and trillions of these. Now, these are so small that when I was discussing before about a wave being a particle or a wave, the choice of being a particle or a wave can affect the behavior of these microtubules. The microtubules can sense in some way these subtle changes with subatomic particles. And I think what they do is, and it has really quite surprised me this to discover that microtubules are like little machines for creating holograms. Apparently they give off light, single photon light. They're like there's two sides to a microtubule. They're like two lines of protein, and they give off towards each other. They give off single photons of light or electromagnetic energy, and these photons, when they get to the center between the two, they bring about interference patterns in exactly the same way as a hologram does. Now, it is possible that trillions and trillions of microtubules resonating at a certain energy level can create holographic images. And these are the holographic images that we perceive as reality. Okay? So because there's been the great mystery of how the brain creates the inner reality from the external stimuli it receives. For instance, it has long intrigued me as to how my overall, and I'll suggest this to any listeners out there, anybody listening to this broadcast, just look around the room you're in at the moment and realize that everything you're seeing is being created by your brain from a piece of energy on the back of your retina that's inverted and the size of a postage stamp. And that's all that is hitting the back of your retina. Your brain is converting that into electronic signals, electrical impulses, which then go into your brain, to the area of your brain that is the visual cortex. And that then reconstitutes all that information from the electrical impulses it's received, and it recreates from these electrical impulses the whole image that you are seeing around you. Now, that is sheer magic.
That means none of the light particles in the room or the entire universe is actually going into your brain in that sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what is even more intriguing about this, and when I first discovered this, when I read about it, it amazed me, is that when you look out of a window and you see the image from the other side of the window, you naturally assume that the photons of light that are hitting your eye are the photons of light that have bounced off the tree that you can see the other side of your window. That's not what's happening. The photons that you are perceiving, the process is that, the light comes from the sun, The photons then bounce off the tree and hit the window. When they hit the window, one photon hits another photon, and one photon hits the atoms in the window, which then suck one of the photons in and eject another photon. And as it goes through the glass, it does this many, many times. So the photons that come through the other side of the glass are not the same photons. The photon then goes into your eye and then goes through the aqueous humor inside your eye, which means it keeps getting changed and changed and changed. And then it hits your retina, and then it's converted into an electric signal, which then goes down the neurons of the brain, goes down to something called the optic chiasma and the suprachiasmatic nuclei in the brain, and then goes to the place that then recreates the picture. It recreates it. The reality you perceive is not the reality that's necessarily out there.
Now we can understand better this idea of seeing why we're seeing things literally from a different perspective, or why we can understand why people have a difference of an event, something that happened. We were talking about layers after layers after layers of both interpretation, of course, by the consciousness itself that perceives things that are happening, but as you say, even actually the photon particles themselves are echoes of each other. It's amazing. We can even order a cup of coffee in a cafe to make it work, when you think about it.
And it's the idea, isn't it? Is it because, there's the term I use very much in my book on the out-of-body experience. It's not, again, original term, but the idea of consensual reality. The reality we perceive out there, we agree that it exists because we believe, we all agree that the things we see are the same. But we can't even agree with the color red, because I cannot ever describe to you what I see when I see red. We both agree that a certain section of the electromagnetic spectrum is a color. But my eyes may stimulate totally different areas of the color patterns within my brain than yours do. But we'd both interpret that color as being red because everything we see that is red is the same color. But we don't know whether our perception is the same color.
That's right.
And it's because the way the brain processes it again. And I know people will turn around and say, well, it's to do with the particular vibrations of that particular part of the electromagnetic spectrum. But it's not that. It's more than that. It's, again, this question of qualia. And one of the great mysteries, is just how the brain does this, because it's not just doing it with sight, is it? It's doing it with your hearing.
Exactly. Everything, yeah. It's
doing it with your somasensory cortex, the idea of knowing where your body is positioned in space. And this, again, is a great problem, to scientists, because it's something called the binding problem. It's the idea of where does it all come together in the brain? For example, why do I feel that everything is simultaneous? Because the signals, the way in which the neurons of the body and the nerves of the body conduct signals are different speeds. They depend whether the neurons are myelinated or not, and different speeds are coming in and are being processed in different parts of the brain. There's the visual cortex where I hear things are processed in a different place. And yet I feel that everything is happening simultaneously. And this is because consciousness buffers information before it's presented to consciousness. This is why you jump before you actually hear a bang. It's because everything is being buffered. And if it's being buffered, it's being recorded. So it becomes more and more intriguing. People tend to think they understand how they function until they start to think about it. And when you think about it, what we understand to be our explanations of consciousness and perception, there is not a little Anthony Peake inside my head that is pulling it all together.
Right.
What is doing the perceiving? And of course, the Buddhists would say nothing is doing the perceiving because it's an illusion. If you look inwardly to suddenly, when you do deep meditation and you say, well, who am I? What am I? Am I my body? Am I my brain? Am I my neurons? And if I then turn around and say I'm none of those things, the question is, what am I? I'm something that uses my body to interface with some form of external reality. But I could be anywhere, couldn't I? I don't have to be in my body. My body could be like a machine that gives me an idea of three-dimensional reality. It processes it like a virtual reality machine.
Absolutely fascinating. There's so much more to talk about. I'm reminded of something, I think it was Robert Anton Wilson actually talked about that at the same time we can have this philosophy that we can question who am I in all of this. At the same time, we are the ones who are pulling all of this together, because from our particular perspective, we are at the center of the universe. Everything is happening, from my perspective, from me and outward, so to speak, in that sense. And I am the one, therefore, from a kind of magician's point of view, that's making the green grass, if you know what I mean, Anthony. Fascinating.
And that is a profoundly important observation. The idea that it's going back to the old Berkeleyism and the idea that the only thing I can know with absolute certitude is that I am. That I'm perceiving. Esse precipi, I think he called it. The idea of to be is to perceive. Yep. Because that's the only thing we know. Now, for instance, people turn around to me and say, well, if external reality is illusion, how come when I go to bed at night and I dream, when I wake up the next morning, my bedroom is still the same as it was when I went to bed? When I get up, the people I interface with, my job, and everything around me is the same. But imagine a scenario that your dream lasts a lifetime, in which case you are dreaming